Good evening. I'm Paul Sloat with Green Drake Partners and Your Money Matters. Tonight with me as my co-host is Michael Carwick of Morgan Stanley. Good evening, Michael.
How you doing, Paul?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
All right. And later we'll be talking with Al Cini of Computer Methods Corp., and he is into behavioral IT. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what your business is and what it does for people?
Well, Computer Methods Corporation is a company that I started in 1980. It's a business-to-business company. We provide information technology training, consulting, and staffing services for companies with IT organizations that need various sorts of staff augmentation.
Great. Now, I understand you have something called a POINT Organizational Transformation Program, if I have that right.
Yeah, you do.
Okay. Tell me what that is,
right.
though. I don't understand what that does.
POINT stands for the Psychology of Innovative Thinking. And it comes from about 3 or 4 years of intensive research into the psychological factors behind problems in IT organizations. I've been an IT consultant myself for more than 30 years. But before I was an IT consultant, I was a psychologist. My background actually is psychology. And I figured once I got into IT, I'd never have to worry about people anymore. And then I ended up in a profession that is extremely people-driven. As rational as people like to think information technology is, it's actually much more emotional, I think, than most people realize. And so for the last couple of years, POINT has been an evolutionary process, developing a family of programs aimed at making IT organizations more productive by addressing the psychological factors that determine productivity.
So if we were trying to determine the sort of productivity issues that POINT does, can you give us some examples of sort of the problems it solves?
Sure, Paul. There are actually two. IT people think for a living, and in their thought processes, there are two psychological syndromes that tend to hold them back. The first is a syndrome that affects them when they work individually, and that's cognitive bias, and Michael mentioned it with respect to investment. People have a tendency to want to answer questions quickly, and sometimes the quickest answer isn't always the best thought out answer. IT people are always under pressure. The number one metric of IT, of information technology, is rapidness of response. Because they're always under that pressure, they tend to deny themselves the little window of time you need from the presentation of a problem to the solution of a problem that's required to really think things through. Cognitive bias is a psychological syndrome. We cover for the fact that we're not allowed to think by reacting reflexively to problems when they're presented, and often those reflexive reactions are counterproductive. So cognitive bias is one of the problems that we solve with POINT, and the other problem is a social problem. It's a problem that occurs when IT people work with each other. It's called the passive-aggressive syndrome, and it affects organizations in pretty much the same way that it affects people in relationships. Passive-aggressive behavior happens when people who are empowered in certain narrow ways prevent access to the things that they are responsible for that other people need, and that preventing access to those things gives them a sense of power, but it denies what other people require to get their work done. And organizationally, it tends to hold everybody back.
So if we know that it's not necessarily the technology, but it's the people, how do we, sort of apply POINT to change what the people are doing?
Actually, there are 3 screws inside the head of an IT person, 3 tiny little screws. The first screw controls the probability that when an IT person is approached, they'll respond defensively. And for a whole bunch of evolutionary reasons, that set screw is twisted all the way down to 0. Generally, they respond very defensively, even when they don't need to. The second screw controls the probability that when an IT person is approached for help, that they'll respond uncooperatively. That screw is also set way down to 0. And the third screw controls the probability that when a person is presented with a practical problem to solve, they'll react ritualistically. They'll try to remember something that they did that they think is similar to what they need to do, and they'll do that again even if it doesn't fit. And POINT is aimed at adjusting those 3 screws, making 3 changes inside IT people's heads so that they communicate more effectively with each other and with their clients, so that they're more willing to cooperate and more willing to offer help and less willing to withhold it, and that they're more willing to look in a fresh way at new problems rather than by trying to remember something they did before and do it again. And our message is really resonating with the clients that we've been calling on.
So if you don't mind telling me a little bit, I'm going to put you on the spot here
Sure.
a bit, but what are some of the outcomes a company might see going through your process rather than the typical hiring? Because there are some good quality staffing companies out there that find good people. So what are some of the differentiators that you would see in the outcome that a company might measure, perhaps?
Well, the real difference is that aside from finding people that we can plant into an existing culture or an existing organization, we provide services that change the culture of the person, change the culture of the organization that we place a person into. So the changes in outcome, what we generally have observed from some of the pilots that we've run, is that we believe we can reclaim a 35% gain in productivity, and that is overall what levels of activity directly leverage results in the organization. How quickly do we complete projects? How quickly do we solve technical problems when they present themselves? We can show numbers that demonstrate that as a result of paying attention to the human factors and not just the body factors, as a result of paying attention to those factors, you can get a 35% gain in productivity, and that's significant.
Oh, that has to speak to the business owners out there, right?
Generally,
their
we
language.
found people
High
receptive.
ROI, as they would say. So if you're providing such a big lift in productivity, why hasn't this been recognized more broadly in the marketplace?
Well, it's funny that you'd mention that, and let's take it, in order to really understand that, I think you kind of need an understanding of how an IT person thinks. IT people are very process-oriented. It's the nature of information technology, probably the nature of technology in general. The process rules. The most important thing are the rules that you follow, the steps that you follow in order to get to a result. What you find, however, when you consider behavioral aspects of an organization is that often when somebody tries to solve a problem, a behavioral problem in a company, by imposing additional restrictions and rules on the company, the behavior that they're trying to prevent actually gets worse. It submerges, it changes, and it moves in weird directions. It's very counterintuitive, but it's true. It's the first instinct of an IT manager is to try to solve behavioral problems or organizational problems by imposing process. They believe that process will solve the problem. Imposing process on humans, as opposed to machines, remember humans are different from machines, imposing process on humans actually makes humans behave more erratically. And that generally is a surprise to most managers, especially in IT. That's the first reorientation that they need to kind of accept before we can be of help to them.
Now, was part of your process working with people and teaching them how to work together better as opposed to just having a process to complete their jobs? I mean, I even think of IT as being fairly linear in terms of the tasks they're supposed to accomplish, timelines, deadlines, and all that kind of thing, but not so much the interaction. You know, I call someone at a tech desk sometimes, and you feel like, you know, they're very on task with what they have to solve, but we're not connecting, if that makes sense.
Well, no, actually it makes perfect sense. And in fact, you're kind of pointing to an example of behavioral problem that can occur in a company. It's very possible for a company to demonstrate metrics that suggest that their people are very productive, very responsive. When in fact, when they actually ask the people that they're serving how they're doing, what they get back qualitatively is a different report from what the numbers suggest. For example, I can measure my response to a help desk call that you make in terms of when did you place the call and when did we answer the question that you asked. However, whether we answer that question effectively, whether we really solve the problem, how often you have to call over and over again reporting the same problem, a lot of those deeper metrics never show up in the report card that an IT organization sends back.
Well, that's a measurement issue.
And it's partly measurement. That's for sure partly measurement. But it's also behavioral in a way, because when you give people a set of rules to follow, they will follow them.
Correct.
They'll treat them as a game. They'll learn how to play the game. They'll win the game, even though in fact they're not winning in any real practical sense for the client.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time tonight, and I know we could probably go on for another half hour on just this topic. And from Money Matters, thank you, and see you next week.